Our weekly reading, Parshat Ree, of course, talks about giving to the poor, all kinds of laws that have to do with helping poor people, giving them tzedaka, and also giving them loans without charging interest. And those loans, if the poor man can't pay until the end of the 7th year, they get cancelled. So I wanted to discuss some of these laws and some of the basic concepts. Many of the things I say are quite well known, but there is always something that every person, the way they describe even the well-known topics, there's always going to be something new. I hope that even for a person who is somewhat knowledgeable, some of these things will be new. So first of all, of course, the word tzedaka, what we call today charity, its connotation, its meaning in Judaism is more like righteousness, or rather something that's fair. Now, Judaism never promotes anything similar to communism or even socialism, but the idea is a lot of times today, especially among the hard left in the Western countries, it seems like they're more worried about taking away from the rich than actually helping the poor. Like the envy and the hatred often that you hear from some of these people, it's mind-boggling. I come from the former Soviet Union. I know exactly what happens when too many people believe in such ideas. Then revolutions happen, and that's what happened in the times of Lenin, the Soviet Bolshevik Revolution, which brought huge suffering to many people. And by taking away from the rich, the poor didn't become better off. In a way, it's like Margaret Thatcher used to say that socialism is equal division of misery, as opposed to capitalism, which is unequal division but of good, of prosperity. So the point is that Torah never, of course, promotes the idea that we should take away most of the body from the rich. It's known that there was a time when in Sweden the taxes were so high that people paid almost all the rich people paid almost all of their earnings to taxes. The taxes could become 80-90% if everything is going even more. It was horrible. So the point is that we don't find such a thing in the Torah. The rich, of course, participate more to help the society, just like it is in the normal capitalist society. I'm not talking about pure capitalism. Of course, poor people have to be helped. In fact, in most Western countries, it's already true that even where the taxes are relatively low, it's still true that 90% of the tax income that the government gets is from 10% of the people. So the 10 richest people already are paying 90% of everything that the government does, whether it's highways or police or whatever it is. So in Judaism, obviously, the rich are not made into, there's no such idea that let's have no billionaires, right? I mean, the rich can be rich, but they do take a fair share in helping the poor. The main idea is to help the poor, not to make the rich poor or average, right? It's not against the rich, it's for the poor. So tzedakah, it's fairness, and the idea is that poor people do get all kinds of help from the rich, but not in order to make the rich into poor. The rich are respected in Judaism. A lot of our sages were rich and some were very poor. In the times of the Talmud and the times of the Mishnah, we found both very rich people and very poor people, and it didn't really matter in terms of the knowledge of the Torah and their of course, input, the way they quote. Most people don't think about it when they quote this or that rabbi, which one of them was rich and which one of them was poor. It absolutely doesn't make any difference. Everybody has their role in this world, and those who are poor, it's one kind of nisayon, one kind of a test. Being rich is also a test. Sometimes being rich is a greater test than being poor in a certain sense. And of course, there is more that Hashem expects from the rich in terms of what they do for others. Whatever the case may be, there were different time periods, of course, in our history also, when the society in general was richer or poorer. But in general, we were trying to help the poor as much as possible without actually making rich into losing most of their property. There's no such idea. If there are billionaires, that's a great thing. Let them be billionaires, but let them also share some of their income with helping others and do a lot of good. By the way, in America, the Institute of actually rich people doing all kinds of philanthropies is quite a good institute that was already founded by hundreds of years ago. In general, in America, rich people are not there to just keep their richness. A lot of them do all kinds of things with their money, good things with their money. So in Judaism, of course, the main amount of money that goes for the poor is supposed to be 1/10 of one's income. But ideally, one should give 1/5. 1/5 is better than 1/10. But more than 1/5 is usually not encouraged. Person shouldn't be giving away most of his possessions for the poor or for any other purpose, except with there are rare exceptions in Judaism when people are allowed to give more than 1/5. But generally speaking, a person gives somewhere between 1/10 and 1/5. So the question is, what should a person do if they don't really have even 1/10 to give? A lot of people, in fact, today, most Orthodox Jews are not particularly rich. Many people have big families and they can barely make the ends meet already. So first of course, no law would ever require a person to give when they don't have their own income. The first thing they have to take care of is themselves, their families, and only then, if they have money, they can give 1/10 of their income to charity, to tzedaka. But one should know that even when a person has a very small income, there are ways to technically be considered giving away 1/10. And that can work mainly in two ways. There's more than two ways, but I'll mention two of the things because it's very complex in Judaism exactly how this 1/10, this tithes, should be measured. You see, the Talmud and the Mishnah discuss much more the tithes of the crop, 1/10 of the crop, maaser rishon, maaser sheni. Those laws are much more straightforward and clear. There's a lot of discussion about those laws. And in fact, the written Torah also, what do we find in the Bible, 1/10? It's usually either the 1/10 of your crop or 1/10 of the animals. Those are the types of tithes that the Torah talks about, including in our Parsha as well, in various places. So the various 10ths that exist, some of it was in Parshat Korach and in other places, so those ones are related to grain, to oil, and all kinds of, to animals, all kinds of other things. And it's not just 10ths. There's also challah that's given to Kohanim from dough, and all kinds of other things that are given sometimes it's not really given away, but a certain type of 10th called maaser sheni is eaten in Yerushalayim. That's actually in our Parsha, the second tithe, what they call. They used to take it to Yerushalayim and eat it in holiness and purity. Whatever the case may be, those laws are very clear. But what about 1/10 of your money? So some say it's not even a biblical law at all, even though it's hinted in the Torah possibly. But the Torah, I mean, those times, of course, most people were farmers, and they gave their tithes from the crop and from other produce. But the 10th that we give from our money, today very few Jews are farmers. Most of the Jews, of course, I work as a programmer, for instance, right? We have a regular salary. So the idea of giving 1/10 of your salary is mentioned by our sages, but there's much less discussion of how exactly you count 1/10 and what's considered your salary, right? From what, gross, net, how do you count all these things? What about the things that you spend? Are your spending subtracted? So all of these things are not very clear. So coming back to a person who is not particularly rich but wants to give 1/10, if it's only a rabbinical law, and maybe it's not even a rabbinical law, but more like a good minhag, what's called a good custom, like I said, according to most opinions, it's not a biblical law to give 1/10 of your money that you earn. At most, it's a rabbinical law. So a lot of people still want to do it, and especially since it has a sigula, it has a kind of quality that people who give 1/10 usually Hashem helps them that they will become rich. So it's a good thing to try to give 1/10. Most Orthodox Jews give 1/10 of their income, but how do you do it when you don't really have money? So there are a few ways to do it, and a couple of ways that I'll mention here. One is that you rely on the opinions that all the basic needs are subtracted from the salary. So you give 1/10 from whatever is left. Now, not only taxes and not only the money you don't really see, but even the money that came to you but went for the most basic needs of you and your needs and the needs of your family. All of that you subtract. And only from the remainder you give 1/10. So that's relatively easy to keep. For a lot of people, this remainder is a very small remainder. The maaser is going to be then a very, very small amount. Another possibility is what you could spend your maaser on. Let's say you count the maaser from your net salary, and the person who barely makes the ends meet, he cannot afford to give that maaser to other people. But even giving it to raise your own kids once they're 6 years old, according to some opinions, not all opinions, but according to some opinions, that can work. Why? Because in old times, of course, a 6-year-old was reasonably independent. People used to start working already at that age. So in a way, it's like helping the poor. Your own child is a poor person who is relying on you. So since you are supporting children who are over 6, it could be used for maaser money, according to some opinions. So most of the people who barely make the ends meet are the people with large families, so usually have a lot of children who are dependent on them until they get married and leave the house. So as long as you keep supporting them, and certainly once they get married, if they're still poor, and you consider supporting them, you can continue supporting them. There is what to rely on to say that this money can be subtracted from maaser money. So this way a person can be spending maaser money within his family. The same is true about elderly parents who don't have money. If elderly parents need help, they actually come first in a certain sense, because when you're helping the poor, your family comes first. So if you have no way to give regular maaser money to various organizations or whatever other ways that exist, then helping your own family can be considered also using maaser that way. So these are the ways that people sometimes fulfill the obligation of giving the maaser. But like I said, really, according to the letter of the law, if you don't have what to give, then you don't have to give, obviously, right? You take care of yourself first. Another interesting idea that Chazal talk about is giving interest-free loans. Of course, in those times it was easier than now for two reasons. First of all, there was almost no inflation. They used to have silver money. So if you give for a few years, you give someone an interest-free loan, you lose very little as long as you get the loan back. Secondly, people who had land in those times, the land by definition was responsible for the loans. So the risk was minimal. When you give somebody a loan, if that person can't pay, then the land is a collateral of sorts. But today, a lot of people don't have land, so a lot of times when giving people loans, you're risking much more. Maybe they won't pay, and at any rate, if a few years pass, the money is worth less, they can buy much less on that money. So it's a greater mesirut nefesh in a certain sense to give loans, but it is a big mitzvah, and people do it all the time in Jewish communities, in Orthodox Jewish communities. A lot of these what's called gmilut chasadim, these types of interest-free loans that are given away, and it's a great way. It's a type of tzedaka that's much better than regular tzedaka, because when you give people money, usually first of all they're ashamed to take. It's a lot easier for people to take an interest-free loan than to take money as charity. Secondly, a lot of times people whose business is suffering, but if you give them money now, they're not going to fall, and it's going to continue. And later they will be giving tzedakah. As opposed to once they already fall, once they already go bankrupt, it's a lot harder for them to restore. So it's a lot better to help people with a loan on time than once a person already is poor and they depend on your tzedakah. So a lot of different ways exist for us. The more mitzvot we do, of course, the more possibilities. And today, the situation is better than, let's say, 200 years ago, of course. We definitely live much better, even though people are still quite poor on average, but there are some rich people in the community, there are some really successful businessmen, and a lot of tzedakah is given. There's a huge amount of money given in Jewish organizations, especially before the holidays. Again, the context of the giving of tzedakah a lot of times has to do with also making sure that people can spend holidays happy, that the poor people will have what to eat on the holidays and make the holidays. So there are a lot of organizations that work specifically before the high holidays. Soon in a month from now is going to be Rosh Hashanah, and then Yom Kippur, and then especially Sukkot. The main spending is going to be during Sukkot, where people will be whole home, and a lot of money needs to be spent, and people who are poor will be supported by various organizations. So may we be worthy to always be on the giving side, and may we fulfill in the best possible way these mitzvot of giving to the poor.